Thanks, Mark. Definitely a lot safer and a lot nicer a city than in the 70s when I told Mark about those stories. So it's very nice to be back, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I've been asked to talk about branched and fenestrated endovascular repair. There'll be some overlap with the previous talks. I wanted to start with some history because these are people for whom I've got the greatest respect and who taught me the techniques that led to us starting our program. On the left is Michael Lawrence Brown, who is a vascular surgeon from Perth. David Hartley in the middle worked as a radiographer in the Royal Perth Hospital and then became the engineer behind the design of the Zenith platform of grafts. And on the right is John Anderson from Adelaide, a vascular surgeon who was a key part of the beginning of all of this. John Anderson was the surgeon who implanted the first successful Zenith fenestrated case in 1998. You've seen this diagram before. The complex aneurysm endovascular techniques are modular devices, and for fenestrated grafting, the body section is a tubular section with various fenestrations or circles or scallops at the top. It's completed with a number of other components to make a modular system. And in this anatomy, it's where the fenestration abuts the visceral arteries and there isn't a bridge, a gap to breach. And in these we put in balloon expandable covered stents to maintain patency and effect a ring seal at the level of the fenestration. 2001 was the first endovascular repair of thoraco-abdominal aneurysm, and the key person behind this and the arch branch, which has come later, is Tim Shooter, who worked in Nottingham and then San Francisco. Tim's a multi-talented man, and this bear he also carved with a chainsaw in California to add to his talents. And again, we've got a similar platform of a body component, in this case with 4 branches for the 4 visceral arteries. It becomes even more modular, a multi-modular system, which is completed with, as was mentioned, fabric covered, typically self-expanding stents, often reinforced. And in this anatomy, we're extending north and south to the appropriate extent to affect a seal in normal aorta above and beyond the visceral segment. We did the first UK fenestrated case in Liverpool in 2003. I couldn't find an image from the case, but this is one of the plans for one of those cases in 2003, and it was a laborious process of measuring, making the measurements to allow us to plan the device to fit the anatomy. We also did the first branched case in 2004, and this is an image from that patient. And happily, this is an image from 2015, I think, or 16. It's not the original extent of the graft because there have been bits and pieces corrected and added since then, but the patient is still alive after 12 years. Since those times when we did these procedures, there's been a huge evolution in many aspects of the procedure, particularly the imaging. The quality of the diagnostic CT that allows us to assess cases is hugely better, as with all computing. The quality of the workstation, similarly, we're not having to do these laborious handwritten plans. The quality of the procedural imaging is huge. When that branch case I showed you, we used to have image intensifiers lined up down the corridor, wheeling them in to overheat and roll them out again and bring in the next one. And you know, it wasn't a lot of fun. The planning centers, the company-led planning centers that plan the grafts for us with huge experience and huge expertise has been a major step. In the technique, personnel, many more people can do these procedures now, which is fantastic for reducing my own radiation burden. I remember the first cases standing at the table for maybe 12 hours, 10, 12 hours, taking the hit. And now, you know, we all know the various steps for radiation protection, the thyroid shield and the glasses. The best part of radiation protection is to give everything to you, and I stand about 18 meters away from the tube. So we've got a lot more personnel who can do this. We've got a lot more tools to do this. The catheters and wires and steerable sheaths now facilitate intervention. And we've talked about strategies for preventing spinal cord ischemia, and we've also talked about stage procedures. One option for stage procedure, which we've used and others have used, is the paraplegia prevention branch. The upward pointing branch in the primary component, which is left open for a number of weeks and then closed secondarily. There's the test occlusion of the last branch if you're using intra-procedural MEPs, which if they don't drop allows us to complete the procedure. And the other technique, which Tim Shooter was the first to describe, is the creation of an endoleak to try and rescue MEPs which have disappeared or reduced intra-procedurally. What about the evidence for all of this? I'm not going to talk about technique anymore. I'm going to focus on the evidence. And this is Parodi, who did the first endovascular infrarenal aneurysm repair, or is attributed to the first in 1990, September 1990. 9 years later, in September 1999, we had the beginning of the UK randomized trials to generate the evidence to understand the place of this procedure. So there is a symmetry with the UK. We did the first UK case in 2003, and 9 years from that, we didn't have a randomized trial starting, but we had the results of the Global Star Registry, which was the UK assimilation of data or collection of data and analysis on fenestrated cases, not thoraco-abdominal, not randomized data, not cost effectiveness, just outcome data from a registry, mainly juxtarenal, pararenal, a few type 4s in this series. And let's just look at the data from this, published in 2012. The mortality in the series was 3.5%, which is higher than the two most recent previously published single center series from Eric Verhoeven and from France, 1 and 2%. Typically these numbers go up when you get national registry data. The things that scare us, many things scare us, but target vessel patency, particularly losing target vessels that lead to mesenteric ischemia or dialysis. The target vessel patency out to 3 and 4 years is 95%, which is pretty good, but those patients who lost target vessels wasn't attended with a huge penalty. There was only one patient who went on to have dialysis. Late secondary interventions, as we have already spoken, affect the cost effectiveness, but there wasn't a cost effectiveness analysis in this, and about 30% of patients at 3 years were in need of secondary interventions. Hello? Try the cursor. Hello? Have you got a... I don't think I'm doing anything different. Thank you. Yeah, sorry about that. So we've gone from the secondary interventions of FEVAR, and now we look at more complex aneurysms, moving more proximally to thoraco-abdominal, and the data here are coming later than with fenestrated. And we're going to start off looking at single center series, which inevitably are going to be a little better. And this is Eric Verhoeven's the two centers he worked at Groningen in the Netherlands and Nuremberg in Germany. 166 patients with a range of thoraco-abdominal aneurysm types, as you see. 30-day mortality of 8%, one of the lowest paraplegia rates you'll see of 1.2%, and typical high reintervention rate of 24%. If we look at the Lille data combined with some London data, not as good results. 89 patients, unfit for open surgery, mortality hovering around 10%, and a higher spinal cord ischemia of 8%. These figures looks similar in mortality terms to the US benchmarking of 450 patients collected from national surgical data with a 30-day mortality of 10% also. when we look now, I'll get away from single center data and look at wider data. The French conducted a study, the window study, multi-center prospective registry, a control group of open surgical repairs from hospital discharge database, primary endpoint of 30-day mortality and secondary endpoints, costs, complications and length of stay. Jean-Pierre Beckman was the name associated with this. I'm not an expert on bootstrapping analysis, but I did read a paper on it in case someone asked me a question, which please don't. I didn't understand the paper, but if we look at effectiveness on the bottom line versus costs on the top, red and green are infradiaphragmatic, TAA, pararenal, and juxtarenal, and they're not showing any better effectiveness for lots more cost. And so this study didn't seem to support it in that setting. The scattered blue dots of the supradiaphragmatic TAA, AAA, no significant difference in ineffectiveness or cost, which led them to conclude that for supradiaphragmatic TAAA, suggesting that fenestrated or branch may become a preferred option, but soft data, soft conclusions. What about post-dissection? This harks back to a slide we had of Caselli saying how would he be treated. We're seeing some early series of these. 30-day mortality. This is from Regensburg and Nuremberg, Peter Kasperjak and Eric Verhoeven. Very small number of patients. 30-day mortality hovering around 10%. No paraplegia. Follow-up at 17 months. 7 late aneurysm-related deaths and a high reintervention rate. There was an evidence synthesis of this treatment published in the Plus One in 2016. And if you look at the numbers of comparing who's had fenestrated and branched versus open surgery or standard TEVAR, there's just a trivial percentage of patients having complex aneurysm repair for chronic dissections. And there were only 1 year data for the branched and fenestrated. So it's very early days in this treatment. Skip that. This is a health technology assessment published in 2014, which is a fascinating read. And it's one of these papers that starts off with massive numbers and then whittles it down to nothing. And the massive numbers looking at clinical effectiveness and cost effectiveness for juxtarenal and thoraco-abdominal aneurysms repaired with fenestrated and branched. And we start off, we started off, sorry, I deleted the slide. We started off with 5253 records for clinical effectiveness, 104 for cost effectiveness, and when they whittled them down, got rid of the duplicates, and ran them through the assessment of quality of evidence, they were left with 0 papers that allowed us to make a useful comparison of fenestrated and branched against open surgical repair. It's a fascinating read. Despite a thorough search, no studies could be found that met the inclusion criteria. All studies comparing the two technologies just separated the patients at baseline based on prognosis. And it seemed to be the higher risk patients, as you might expect, getting fenestrated and branched, but there was nothing useful. Patients with the poorest prognosis seemed to be allocated to the newer technologies, as you would expect. And they recommended a clinical trial to provide an unbiased estimate of effect of FEVAR and BVAR against open surgery. And such a study is about to start. So first fenestrated in the UK, 2003, 2016, the NIHR provided a couple of million for this study, which is a UK COMPASS study to be led by my colleague Raoul Valavaneni from Liverpool. It's not going to be a randomized study, not randomized because the physicians from the hospitals that were going to participate all said they didn't have clinical equipoise and wouldn't randomize, so randomization wasn't going to happen for that reason. And there was also a question that a randomized trial wouldn't have validity because there are too many variables for fenestrated and branched in the complexity of the devices, and for open surgery in the technique infrarenal, suprarenal clamping. So it was felt it couldn't work as a randomized trial. So the UK COMPASS study will be a risk-adjusted, anatomically stratified cohort comparison study to try and answer the question, who should be operated on, because there's best medical therapy here, who should be operated on and by what technique. And this will be taking data out of the National Vascular Registry. And in terms of the branched grafts for thoraco-abdominal, I find it confusing as to whom we should treat. And what you didn't mention earlier, I'm sure you've thought about, is what I find harder is whom we shouldn't treat. The EVAR2 trials suggested to us that there's a significant population that don't benefit from treatment. And given that we're all mortal, there are patients that we discuss regularly at MDT, and Ong and Manoj and Mark don't want to operate on them, and we're not quite sure do they justify the complexities and risks and spinal cord ischemia insult of branched endovascular repair. And the other evidence that will come from that, again, it's observational study, is the ETA study, effective treatments for thoracic aortic aneurysms. So I haven't shown you, radiologists, lots of pictures, but I've tried to tell you where we're at in evidence, and I feel maybe we did the first cases in 2003 and 2004. Maybe I feel a little guilty that we should have pushed for these things sooner, but I'm delighted that now with these two studies, I think we're going to get some useful data to guide decision. Thanks very much.